And the connection between October the 7th and Iran, what's happening now.
Yes, Hamas is actually a part of a network of terror groups and organizations, both Sunnis like Hamas or Islamic Jihad and Shiites like the Hezbollah in Lebanon or Iraqi Shiite militias. This is a network that has been known by the name of the Axis of Resistance, or in Arabic, Mahwar al-Muqawama. And this is a network that has been massively supported by the Iranian regime to serve the expansionist program of the Iranian regime. Now, think about it as a chain that each and every one of the link is connected one to the other. October 7, you got the war with Hamas, and the next day, October 8, Hezbollah in Lebanon is starting to poke Israel. The leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, said, I'm going to support the Palestinians. Remember what happened a year later with the story of the beepers? You probably remember that. And you remember the story of the elimination of the Hezbollah leadership. That was a pivotal moment because in November 24, 1 year after October 7, the Hezbollah, which is the most powerful proxy in this network, has been significantly defeated. There is a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon. 2 weeks afterwards, Michael, Assad regime in Syria is falling down. That regime was holding on for 14 years in a brutal war. The reason it was falling down is because Hezbollah was defeated, neutralized, and it was unable to come to the aid of Assad regime. So in December 24, 1 year and a little bit more than October 7, Assad regime is following down. That paves the way to the next milestone, and that is June 2025, the 12 days war between Israel and Iran. What happened between the downfall of Assad regime and the war was that Israel was strategically taking out all the anti-aerial defense capacities of the Syrians, and by doing that, Israel was basically paving a corridor, an aerial corridor, stretching all the way from Israel to Iran. Remember, in June 2025, the 12 days war in Iran, and now we get to this specific moment, the furious operation and the war that right now is getting in Iran.
And you mentioned that these axes. You've described Israel's strategy as being built on a triangle of deterrence. Explain, please, what that triangle is and whether we're beginning to see the end of it, perhaps.
The Mullah regime has been building a very sophisticated insurance policy that, in the shape of a triangle, that has three components. One is the nuclear program. The other one is the missiles and the drones capacities, and the third one is the axis of resistance, those proxies that I mentioned before. The interesting thing about that triangle that is very sophisticated, each and every one of the components is actually ensuring or defending the other components. Like, for example, the Iranians said, if you are going to attack my nuclear program, I'm going to activate my two other components, the missiles and the drones, as well as the proxies, to harm you. If you are going to attack the proxies, I'm going to use my missiles and capacities to harm you back. If you are going to try to go after my nuclear program, I'm going to unleash the dogs of war, the axis of resistance, and I'm going to use both the missiles and the drones capacities. That triangle provided the Mullah regime with a perfect immunity, and amazingly, while the Mullah regime has been inflicted an enormous death and destruction across the Middle East for the last couple of decades, particularly in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Mullah regime was totally immune. It left immune because of that specific triangle of deterrence.
And you've compared the current confrontation like a poker game. That's your comparison I've heard you make between Iran, Israel. You've got the Gulf states that have all been hit recently by Iran, and the United States. So based on the regional realities, what seems more likely in the near and medium term? Are we going to see the collapse of, or the survival of the regime?
I think that in the short term, we should not necessarily look at the process of the collapse of the regime. I think that we are more looking at a process where we see clearly the significant weakening of that regime. And I think that when we try to look a little bit beyond the horizon, I think that what we'll see currently is the beginning of political reconfiguration in Iran that will basically bring to the picture more and more factors in Iran, including the public opinion that has been to a large extent remain on the sideline or absent from the political power center. And as in it for itself, it's a good process, but I think that we should set a more realistic perspective, at least at the short term, even though I would say most of the analysts are basically assuming that in the end of the day we are looking at a gradual process of inner political change in Iran, which hopefully will result in the end of the process, the rise to power of a totally much more friendly government.
We hope so. And we've seen Iran target Gulf countries, even in the last 24 hours, Qatar, Oman, Dubai. What's the strategy there?
The story here is what you mentioned before, Michael, the story of the poker game. That has been one of the most, and still, powerful cards in the possession of the Iranians. It should be very clear. They started and continue to attack their Arab neighbors, the Arab Gulf monarchies, focusing on the oil and energy infrastructure because they evaluate that this is a major pressure card on the United States to stop the war. What they are trying to do is to create a global economic crisis, rising up, soaring the price of energy, and through that to result in a global crisis in the world, and by that to put a pressure on the United States to hold the war. And by the way, the Arab Gulf monarchies have been shocked by the fact that they have been attacked by the Iranians because they thought that they will be left out of that. They were damn wrong.
They were. And so despite the current violence and instability, do you see any realistic pathway towards a Middle East that is more peaceful in the aftermath of all of this?
A long story short, the answer is yes. Once this regime is weakened, and it is significantly weakened, let alone going down, we could expect a much more stabilized situation, and particularly, by the way, in the context of the further trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Interesting analysis. We're so pleased to have you with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Avi Melamed. Thank you so much. Thank you, Avi.